there.
So today we're diving into a recent BBC article. It came out in May 2025, and the title is pretty striking: Why the Mighty Himalayas Are Getting Harder and Harder to See.
Yeah, it paints a pretty gloomy picture, doesn't it? Blaming Haze, mostly.
Exactly. But, before we just accept that narrative, we thought it's really important to look at other angles. Our mission today is basically to examine the claims in that BBC piece, maybe even debunk some of them.
And to do that, we're looking at a response from someone who knows Nepal really well, right? David Ways.
That's the one. He's a Nepal guidebook author, been there ages, and he published a pretty detailed rebuttal. So let's sort of unpack this whole thing.
Okay, first up, this idea of seeing the Himalayas from Kathmandu. The BBC author talks about childhood memories, clear views, and how that's gone now.
Right. There's definitely that sense of loss in the article, but Ways, he tells a different story.
What does he say?
He basically argues that seeing the big peaks clearly from Kathmandu city itself, well, that's been pretty rare for decades.
Oh, really? Decades.
Yeah, he puts it down more to the sheer distance and, the city just getting bigger and bigger, urban sprawl, not just recent weather changes.
Huh. So not primarily Haze, then?
Not according to him, not for the city views historically. He does say, look, maybe you'll catch a glimpse from somewhere like Patan, right after the rain washes the air clean.
Okay, so it's less about a recent disappearance and more about maybe expectations versus long-term reality.
Seems like it. Ways suggests if you really want views near Kathmandu, you should maybe hike up to Dulakal, especially between October and February, or try Patan on a really clear winter day.
Right, practical advice versus maybe slightly nostalgic reporting in the BBC piece.
Could be. Now let's talk about the haze itself. The BBC definitely points to that as the main villain here.
And Ways doesn't deny haze is a problem, does he? He agrees air pollution, especially in spring, is a real issue, not just Nepal, but across Asia.
Yeah, he mentions those grass fires that people set on purpose.
Right, to clear land and prevent bigger forest fires later. That's a known contributor to springtime haze.
Okay, so they agree haze exists, but the BBC makes it sound like clear skies in spring and autumn are basically gone. History.
And that's where Ways pushes back. He says, look, spring haze isn't new. And autumn, around October, he argues you need really freak weather for the mountains to be totally hidden then. That's usually prime viewing time.
Okay, what about that story in the BBC article? A plane circling Kathmandu airport 20 times in April because of haze. That sounds pretty bad.
It does sound dramatic.
Yeah.
But Ways offers, let's say, context. He points out Kathmandu airport is famously congested, really busy.
Okay.
And apparently it was even under repair back in April 2025. Plus, he mentions it lacks really sophisticated radar systems. So his point is delays in circling. That's been happening for, over 10 years for various reasons.
So maybe not just the haze in that specific case. Could be a mix of things.
That seems to be his suggestion. It's easy to blame the visible thing, the haze, but maybe there are underlying airport issues too.
That makes sense. The BBC author also mentioned staying in a hotel, fairly high up, where they should have seen mountains during a 2-week stay, but didn't.
And Ways found that a bit odd. He was like, which hotel? He says he hasn't heard of any hotel in Kathmandu promising reliable mountain views for, decades.
Interesting. So maybe expectations again, or the specific location wasn't quite the viewpoint they thought.
Possibly. Then there's Nagarko. The BBC describes it as a major viewpoint, but the author only saw haze.
Yeah, Nagarko often gets mentioned, doesn't it?
It does, but Ways argues it's actually never been that great or reliable for spectacular views, especially not for seeing Everest. He thinks maybe older guidebooks hyped it up a bit too much.
Overrated, potentially.
That's the suggestion. He'd point you towards Dulakal again, or maybe suggest taking a mountain flight for those guaranteed close-up views.
And didn't the BBC article itself have a quote kind of backing that up from a Nagarko hotel owner?
Yes. Yogendra Shakya. Been operating a hotel there since '96. And he said he's actually rebranded his hotel away from promising mountain views because they're just too unreliable.
Wow, okay. That definitely lends weight to Ways' point about Nagarko maybe not living up to its old reputation.
It really does. Relying on old info can lead to disappointment,
Then there's the Annapurna trek. The BBC author mentions trekking there a year before and hardly seeing peaks.
Yeah, and Ways kind of flags this as being a bit vague. The Annapurna region is huge. Where exactly were they?
Good point.
Was it a high-altitude trek or somewhere lower down like Saraikot near Pokhara, which Ways says was never really the best spot for massive Annapurna views anyway, without knowing the route and the timing.
Yeah.
It's hard to say it was just haze.
Right, context matters. But to be fair, Waze doesn't dismiss the general concern about haze, right? He acknowledges scientists say it's getting worse, lasting longer.
Absolutely. He's not denying air pollution is a problem. His main point seems to be adding nuance and context to the specific claims and anecdotes in the DVC piece. He thinks it's maybe presented a bit too simplistically.
Okay. The BBC defines haze using pollutants and visibility less than 5,000 meters and says it lingers longer now in the dry season because of climate change.
And Waze finds that 5,000-meter distance definition a bit strange for Nepal.
How so?
Because in Nepal, 5,000 meters usually means altitude, right? And at 5,000 meters altitude, you'd normally expect to see mountains, especially in peak season, unless the weather's really bad. So defining haze by a visibility distance of 5 kilometers seems, well, a bit weird in that context.
Interesting distinction. Traditional best times to visit. BBC says March, May, and October, November for clear skies.
Waze refines that a bit. He says March, while marketed, can still be cloudy, kind of the tail end of the monsoon's influence sometimes. He really points to mid-October through mid-December as the sweet spot for reliably great visibility before it gets super cold and snowy high up.
Gotcha. Then the BBC quotes a trekking guide seeing a 40% drop in business blamed on haze.
And Waze says, hold on, there could be other big factors. Like, remember Nepal banned independent trekkers in 2023?
Oh, right.
And there were, sadly, several plane crashes, which might affect confidence. Plus, travel costs have generally gone up everywhere. It might not just be haze impacting business.
And the idea of companies refunding trekkers if they don't see mountains because of haze.
Waze says he's never heard of that happening. Finds it highly unlikely, basically.
Okay. The BBC also includes an Australian tourist's disappointment, saying it wasn't this hazy 10 years ago.
And Waze acknowledges the disappointment, sure.
Okay.
But he argues that, look, weather in the mountains is always variable. Visibility fluctuates. It's not a new thing. He even mentions writing about similar visibility issues and local explanations for them a decade ago himself.
So bad weather or hazy days aren't unprecedented, even 10 years ago.
Seems to be his point. He stresses there's always a bit of luck involved with getting perfect views, and the window for that perfect weather can be limited.
The BBC does mention trekking agents are worried, though, about livelihoods.
Which is totally understandable. If tourism perception changes, it impacts them directly. But again, Waze's perspective suggests the reasons might be more complex than just more haze equals fewer happy tourists.
The BBC piece then looks wider, mentioning similar haze in the Indian Himalayas, even Pakistan.
Right, which shows it's a regional issue, not just Nepal.
Yeah.
Air pollution doesn't respect borders, obviously. The comments from people in India and Pakistan about longer dry spells in haze seem to back up the wider trend.
And the sources of pollution listed traffic, industry, construction dust, waste burning, forest fires, crop burning.
Waze agrees on the grass fires point, as we said. And the BBC quotes a scientist, Dr. Samshwar Das, predicting more haze and dust storms due to climate change.
Does Waze argue with that?
Not the general climate change impact, but he does call for more concrete data to back up specific long-term projections like that. He wants to see the numbers.
Fair enough. Then there's that statistic about Pokhara Airport. Hazy days jumping from 23 in 2020 to 168 in 2024. That sounds huge.
It does. But Waze raises questions. Which Pokhara Airport? The new international one, which has had some teething issues apparently, or the old domestic one that's mostly closed? And he also expresses, let's say, general skepticism about how reliable detailed weather data is from many stations in Nepal, beyond just basic stuff like sunrise times. So he's hesitant to take that number entirely at face value without more context.
Okay. The BBC concludes the Himalayas are probably the worst affected range globally because they're near so many people and pollution sources, and suggests clear views might become like postcard-only memories.
And that's where Waze really draws the line. He calls that pure hyperbole, just way too pessimistic and dramatic in his view.
Right. The BBC also quotes a trekking leader feeling guilty when clients don't see mountains.
And again, Waze sees this as part of the BBC article being overly dramatic, maybe clickbaity. He feels it has quite a few holes in its argument.
So to wrap up Waze's perspective, he thinks the BBC article is sensationalized, misses important context.
Pretty much. He stresses mountain weather is unpredictable, marketing can create unrealistic expectations, and the regional fire issue causing haze isn't new. It's been happening for decades.
His advice for tourists:
do your homework. Research the best time for the specific place you want to go. Maybe consider higher altitude treks if clear views are the absolute priority during certain seasons. And he also adds, Nepal's making progress on things like hydropower and electric vehicles, so it's not all doom and gloom.
It really shows how one issue visibility can be seen so differently, doesn't it? The
Yeah.
BBC focusing on pollution impacts, Waze bringing in decades of ground-level experience and context.
Exactly. It's a more complex picture. While air quality is definitely a concern, Waze offers a less alarmist take based on long-term observation.
It's a good reminder for us and for you listening to always look for multiple perspectives, especially on environmental stories like this. Be critical, seek out local knowledge.
Yeah, especially if you're planning a trip yourself. Don't just rely on one headline. Dig a bit deeper into the nuances of when and where to go for the best chance of experiencing what you hope to see.
Definitely. And if you are thinking about Nepal and want that deeper perspective, David Way's website is a great resource. It's The Longest Way Home, thelongestwayhome.com. He's got his travel website there and his guidebooks too. Really valuable stuff.
Absolutely. So it leaves us with a final thought, perhaps. We know air quality is a real challenge in the Himalayas, but what other, maybe less dramatic factors could be influencing how we perceive changes in visibility over the years? Something to think about.